"Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all classifications," announced Dr. Nexus Prime, adjusting his sensory appendages as he gazed across the grand medical amphitheatre of Station Aurora. "Today we gather to discuss what might be the most remarkable case in xenobiological history." The floating lights of the amphitheatre dimmed automatically, casting a soft blue glow across the assembled crowd of the galaxy's finest medical minds. Dr. Prime's crystalline exoskeleton sparkled under the remaining illumination, his reputation preceding him as much as his distinctive appearance did. Now, before I present today's subject matter, let me remind you all that I've spent 47 cycles studying survival rates across species. I've documented everything from Martian dust mites to Jovian gas swimmers. He paused, mandibles clicking in what his colleagues recognized as barely contained excitement. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what we discovered on Surface X 912. A holographic display materialized behind him, showing environmental readings that caused several audience members to emit involuntary distress pheromones. Dr. Valix III, seated in the front row, actually changed color from her usual serene green to a shocked purple. Yes, I see those reactions," Dr. Prime continued, gesturing with his upper appendages. "Those numbers are not a malfunction. Surface X 912 registers at minus 240 degrees in its night cycle, soaring to positive 180 during its day cycle. The atmospheric pressure? 13 times standard. Radiation levels? Let's just say your safety protocols would be screaming before you got within 1,000 kilometers of the surface." The assembled scientists murmured amongst themselves, their various biological communication methods creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and electromagnetic pulses. But here's where it gets interesting. Dr. Prime activated another hologram, this one showing a biological scan. We found something living there. Not just surviving, but thriving. And before you ask, no, it's not a silicon-based life form. No, it's not a quantum state being. It's something far more improbable. He took a moment to savor the anticipation, his sensory crystals vibrating with barely contained excitement. The entire room had gone so quiet you could hear the station's air recyclers humming in the background. "We found a human." The words hung in the air for precisely 2.3 seconds before chaos erupted. Dr. Valix III fainted, her assistant quickly extending a support tendril to catch her. The hive mind representatives in the back row broke into such intense debate that their shared consciousness temporarily split into arguing fragments. Even the usually stoic gas cloud collective began swirling in agitated patterns. Please, Dr. Prime raised all 4 of his appendages, calling for order. "I understand your skepticism. If I hadn't documented this myself, I wouldn't believe it either. But what we're about to discuss will revolutionize our understanding of biological adaptation and survival. More importantly," he added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone, "it's going to make us completely rewrite the definition of impossible." "The discovery happened during our routine mineral survey," Dr. Prime continued, pulling up a new hologram showing the jagged crystalline surface of X 912. "Our scanners picked up what we thought was the equipment malfunction. A heat signature where no heat should exist." The recording played, showing the research vessel's approach. Through the swirling storms of metallic dust and ionic discharge, a small structure became visible. It appeared to be cobbled together from spacecraft debris and native crystal formations. At first, we thought it was just another automated mining outpost. Those things malfunction all the time on extreme worlds. But then... He paused, tapping a control that zoomed in on a figure moving outside the structure. Then we saw this. The recording showed a suited figure, clearly bipedal, clearing accumulated crystal growths from what appeared to be a makeshift solar array. The suit wasn't even a proper environmental suit. It was a standard emergency pressure suit with crude modifications. Meet Sarah Chen, formerly of the merchant vessel Star Wanderer. When we found her, she had been surviving on Surface X 912 for 6 months, 14 days, and approximately 7 hours. Dr. Prime's voice carried a note of amazement, that made his crystalline structure resonate. According to all our biological models, she should have died within the first hour. He brought up the initial medical scans, causing several medical devices in the audience to automatically shut down in disbelief. Look at these readings. Her cellular structure should have shattered in the extreme temperature shifts, the radiation levels alone. Dr. Prime's assistant, Dr. Pollux Wave, stepped forward with additional data streams. She should have been cooked from the inside out, but instead we found her playing cards with a computer she built from salvaged parts. The audience's shock was palpable. A gaseous entity in the third row actually condensed partially out of pure surprise. Let me describe the conditions she survived in, Dr. Prime continued, bringing up environmental data. Surface X-912 isn't just hostile. It's what we classified as a Category 9 death world. The planet's crystal composition creates daily electromagnetic storms that would fry most shielding systems. The temperature swings I mentioned earlier, they happen every 8.3 hours. That's a 420-degree temperature shift faster than most metals can handle without structural failure. He gestured to a simulation showing the planet's surface conditions. The atmospheric pressure means that stepping outside during high-pressure fronts is like being a kilometer underwater. The crystal storms carry particles sharp enough to cut through standard hull plating. The radiation from the binary star system. He clicked his mandibles in disbelief. Well, let's just say we had to create new measurement scales. The recording continued, showing their first contact with Sarah. The human was wearing a suit patched with what appeared to be melted crystal fragments and local metal alloys. She had rigged up an atmospheric processor using parts from her ship's coffee maker and navigation system. When we approached her shelter, she was actually reluctant to leave. Said she had, and I quote, "just figured out how to make decent coffee in this pressure." Our rescue team found her research notes. She'd been studying the crystal formations and had developed 3 new theories about their growth patterns. Dr. Valek's third, having recovered from her earlier faint, raised a sensory appendage. But the cellular damage, the genetic degradation from the radiation. That's the most remarkable part, Dr. Prime replied, pulling up Sarah's medical scans. Her cells show signs of adaptation, not just survival, actual adaptation. Her bone density increased by 22%. Her cellular repair mechanisms accelerated. She developed additional melanin production to handle the radiation. The human body, instead of breaking down, was actually learning to thrive in these conditions. The amphitheater erupted in a cacophony of scientific debate. Dr. Prime let the chaos continue for a moment, before raising his appendages for silence. And that, my esteemed colleagues, is just the beginning of what we discovered. Because what Sarah Chen did next would challenge every principle of xenobiology we thought we understood. The Star Wanderer was a Class 3 merchant vessel, carrying industrial replicators to the Centauri colonies, Dr. Prime explained, displaying the ship's flight path. They hit an unexpected crystal storm that overloaded their shields and damaged their warp core. Sarah Chen, serving as the ship's engineer, had exactly 47 seconds to make a decision. The hologram showed the massive merchant ship breaking apart in Surface X 912's atmosphere. Escape pods launched in all directions, but only one, Sarah's, had its trajectory manually calculated to land near a mineral deposit she had spotted on entry. She knew the standard emergency beacons wouldn't survive the planet's electromagnetic storms. So instead of following emergency protocols, she did something that our rescue experts are still calling brilliantly insane. Dr. Prime played Sarah's own recorded testimony, her voice filling the amphitheater with remarkable calm. Look, it was simple math. The escape pod couldn't handle those pressure changes, but the planet's crystal formations create natural pressure pockets. I just had to land in one and work from there. Simple math, Dr. Prime repeated, his crystals flickering with amused disbelief. She calls plotting a manual atmospheric entry through crystal storms, magnitude 9 wind shears, and electromagnetic interference that fried 3 of her pod's computers. Simple math. The recording continued, showing Sarah's makeshift habitat. She had wedged her escape pod into a crystal formation, using the natural structure as a pressure shield. The pod's emergency supplies should have lasted 2 weeks. She made them last 2 months. Here's where human ingenuity gets fascinating, Dr. Prime gestured excitedly. She discovered that the crystal formations weren't just structures, they were sort of alive. They grew in response to electromagnetic fields. So she rigged her pod's emergency beacon to generate specific frequencies, literally farming the crystals into shapes she needed. The audience watched in amazement, as time-lapse footage showed crystals growing into rough but effective walls, barriers, and even basic tools. But survival wasn't enough for Sarah Chen. No, she decided to conduct research while she was there. Using her broken tablet computer and parts from her suit's environmental sensors, she built a crude laboratory. She discovered that certain crystal frequencies could purify water from the planet's toxic ice deposits. She found ways to use the extreme temperature shifts to generate power. Dr. Pollock's wave stepped forward again, adding, "She even developed a way to predict the crystal storms by studying harmonic resonances in her shelter's walls. Our meteorological teams are still analyzing her methods." The food situation proved most interesting, Dr. Prime continued. The emergency rations ran out after 2 months. That's when she discovered something extraordinary about the planet's crystal-based ecosystem. There were microscopic organisms living in the crystal matrices, something our previous surveys had missed entirely. She found a way to culture them using minerals from her crashed pod and the electric charge from the storms. The hologram showed Sarah's notes, detailed drawings of crystal structures, bacterial cultures, and what appeared to be a recipe written in 3 different languages. She called it crystal soup, Dr. Prime said, mandibles twitching in what his colleagues recognized as suppressed laughter. Apparently it tasted terrible but contained all the nutrients she needed to survive. She even managed to synthesize caffeine from some of the bacterial byproducts. As she put it, another playback of Sarah's voice. "You haven't lived until you've had coffee made from crystal-dwelling bacteria that can survive radiation levels that would melt lead. Tastes like burnt rubber and victory." The audience's reaction ranged from horror to admiration. A group of hive mind scientists were frantically copying her notes, while several energy beings had formed a discussion cluster trying to comprehend how a carbon-based life form could exhibit such adaptation. But perhaps most remarkably, Dr. Prime concluded this section, she kept a journal, not for scientific purposes, but as she said, to write a bestseller when I get back. She even named the local crystal formations, that particularly large one outside her shelter. She called it Bob. A ripple of confused murmuring passed through the audience at the mention of such a simplistic name for a magnificent crystal structure. "Yes, yes," Dr. Prime agreed with their confusion. "Human naming conventions continue to baffle us. But what came next would baffle us even more." The real revelations came during the medical examinations, Dr. Prime announced, bringing up a detailed holographic model of human physiology. Our standard medical protocols weren't just challenged, they were completely shattered. He gestured to a series of cellular scans that rotated slowly in the air. First, let's look at the baseline human biology. We all know humans are classified as endurance predators with remarkable healing capabilities. But what we found in Sarah Chen's case went far beyond normal human resilience. Dr. Pollock's wave stepped forward, adding his expertise. The first shock came during the standard radiation screening. According to all our instruments, she should have absorbed enough radiation to kill a Jovian gas whale. Instead, her cells had developed an unprecedented defense mechanism. The hologram zoomed in to the cellular level, showing active mitochondrial changes that caused several medical specialists in the audience to float up from their seats in surprise. Her mitochondria, Dr. Prime continued, had actually evolved to use the radiation as a supplementary energy source. We've never seen anything like it. The closest comparison would be the silicon-based life forms of the Vulcan system, but even they can't match this adaptation rate. He brought up a comparison chart showing survival rates across known species. Look at these numbers. A Martian rock crawler can survive temperature extremes of 400 degrees variance. The crystal entities of Rigel can withstand pressure changes of up to 11 standard atmospheres. The energy beings of Tau Ceti don't even have physical forms to damage, but none of them can adapt on the cellular level like this. The next series of scans showed Sarah's skeletal structure. Notice the bone density. In just 6 months, her skeleton had begun reorganizing its internal structure to better handle the pressure changes. Her bone marrow was producing enhanced red blood cells with unprecedented oxygen-carrying capacity. Dr. Valix III interrupted, her color shifting to a skeptical orange. But the energy requirements for such rapid adaptation would be astronomical, Dr. Prime finished. Yes. That's what makes this next part so fascinating. Her basal metabolic rate should have been off the charts. Instead, her body developed what we can only describe as selective hibernation. Different organs would cycle through rest states, maintaining just enough function to survive, while others worked at peak efficiency. The hologram shifted to show her neural patterns. Her brain adapted too. We found new synaptic formations that allowed her to process the extreme sensory input from her environment. She could predict pressure changes by feeling subtle vibrations in her shelter's crystal walls. She developed an almost instinctive understanding of the planet's deadly rhythms. Dr. Prime pulled up the comparison data with other rescued crash survivors. Most species, when exposed to such extreme conditions, show severe psychological deterioration. Isolation, extreme environmental stress, constant survival pressure. It breaks down even the strongest minds. But Sarah? She not only maintained her sanity, she developed a working scientific methodology to study her environment. The medical scans continued, showing more impossibilities. Her skin had developed new melanin variants we've never seen before. Her liver had created entirely new enzymatic pathways to process the crystal-based nutrients she was consuming. Even her gut bacteria had evolved to help her digest materials that should have been completely indigestible. He paused, letting the implications sink in. We ran these tests 15 times. We had 3 different medical facilities verify the results. There was no error. This human's body rewrote parts of its own biology to survive. The next display showed her immune system activity. Perhaps most remarkably, her immune system adapted to recognize and neutralize the crystal-based bacteria she was consuming, while simultaneously developing a symbiotic relationship with them. She wasn't just surviving the planet's ecosystem, she was becoming part of it. Dr. Pollack's wave highlighted a particularly interesting data set. We found crystal microstructures in her bloodstream that had been modified by her body's natural processes. They were acting as microscopic radiation shields. Her body had taken the very things that should have killed her and turned them into protective mechanisms. But here's what truly amazes me, Dr. Prime said, his voice dropping to a reverent tone. When we asked her about these remarkable adaptations, about her body's incredible survival mechanisms, do you know what she said? He played the recording of Sarah's response. Well, yeah, the first month was pretty rough. Had some weird headaches, felt kind of sick. But you know how it goes. Give it a few weeks and you can get used to anything, even crystal soup. The audience erupted in a mixture of disbelief and amazement. Several scientists were frantically recording data, while others seemed to be having existential crises. Get used to anything, Dr. Prime repeated. She described one of the most remarkable examples of rapid biological adaptation we've ever documented as getting used to it. He brought up the final set of test results. And here's the most shocking part. When we brought her back to normal environmental conditions, her body retained most of these adaptations. Her cellular structure maintained its radiation resistance. Her enhanced healing capabilities persisted. She even kept her ability to digest crystal-based materials. The implications were staggering. Dr. Prime let the silence hang for a moment, before delivering his conclusion to this section. My esteemed colleagues, we're not just looking at survival against impossible odds. We're looking at a species that can actively evolve on demand. A biology so adaptable it can rewrite itself to thrive in conditions that should be universally lethal, and they consider this normal. The medical data continued to float in the air, each impossible number a testament to human resilience. Dr. Prime's crystals flickered with excitement as he prepared to move to his next point. But if you think these medical results are shocking, wait until you hear how the broader scientific community reacted to our findings. The initial reaction from the Galactic Medical Board was, shall we say, colourful, Dr. Prime said, displaying headlines from various scientific journals. The prestigious Journal of Xenobiology called it an elaborate hoax or a fundamental misunderstanding of basic biology. The Centaurian Science Academy demanded our immediate resignation for promoting impossible theories. Dr. Pollock's wave projected a recording of the first presentation to the Board of Xenological Studies. The footage showed a panel of distinguished aliens from across the galaxy, their reactions ranging from outright dismissal to barely contained outrage. "Preposterous!" came the voice of Dr. Quantum Blue, his energy form flickering with skepticism. "Next, you'll tell us these humans can breathe vacuum or digest plasma." The most vocal critic was Professor Nova Bright of the Rigelian Institute, Dr. Prime continued, showing a clip of the renowned scientist's scathing review. She called for a full investigation into our research methods, claiming we had clearly been fooled by faulty equipment or, more likely, human deception. He paused, his crystalline structure gleaming with what could only be described as smug satisfaction. That's when Sarah Chen decided to provide a practical demonstration. The hologram shifted to show a sealed laboratory chamber. Sarah stood inside, wearing nothing but standard medical monitoring equipment. The environmental controls began to shift, creating conditions similar to Surface X 912. We had to stop 3 different safety officers from shutting down the demonstration, Dr. Pollock's wave added. They were convinced we were about to witness a human's death. Instead, we witnessed something extraordinary. The recording showed Sarah's vital signs adjusting in real time as the chamber's conditions became increasingly hostile. The temperature plummeted, then soared. The pressure increased to crushing levels. Radiation levels rose far beyond safety parameters. "Notice her cellular response," Dr. Prime highlighted. "The adaptations we documented began reactivating almost immediately. Her body remembered not just how to survive these conditions, but how to thrive in them." The footage showed Sarah doing basic calisthenics in conditions that should have liquefied her organs. She was smiling. The board's response was immediate chaos, Dr. Prime said, showing the pandemonium that erupted in the observation room. Dr. Quantum Blue actually split into 3 separate energy states from shock. Professor Nova Bright demanded to personally examine the chamber for hidden technology or protective fields. Sarah's voice came through the recording. "You know, if you're all done freaking out, I could really use a cup of coffee, preferably the crystal-based kind. Regular coffee just tastes boring now." The proof demonstrations continued for 3 days, Dr. Prime said. "We subjected her to every test the board could devise. They brought in experts from 17 different fields of science, each one left more baffled than the last." He displayed the final report from the Galactic Medical Board. Their official conclusion, and I quote, "While we cannot fully explain the mechanisms at work, the evidence for advanced adaptive capabilities in human physiology is undeniable. Current classification systems may require significant revision." Dr. Valix III, who had been one of the original skeptics, raised her appendage. "But surely there must be limits to this adaptation capability?" "That's the fascinating part," Dr. Prime responded. "We don't know what those limits are. Every time we think we've found the boundary of human adaptability, someone like Sarah Chen comes along and casually redefines possibility." He brought up one final clip, showing Sarah teaching a group of xenobiologists how to prepare her crystal soup recipe. Several of them were visibly disturbed as she happily consumed the glowing concoction. "The impact on our understanding of biology has been profound," Dr. Prime concluded. We've had to reassess everything we thought we knew about cellular adaptation, radiation resistance, and biological evolution, and perhaps most importantly— He paused, his crystals pulsing with amused light. We've had to accept that sometimes the most remarkable scientific discoveries come not from our advanced research facilities or sophisticated theories, but from a human who just decided that dying wasn't convenient and adapted accordingly. The audience's reaction was a mixture of nervous laughter and thoughtful silence. Dr. Prime gestured to his final slide. And now, if you'll permit me, I'll share with you the broader implications of these findings and why we may need to reconsider our entire classification of death worlds. Following these revelations, the galactic scientific community has been forced to make some rather significant adjustments, Dr. Prime announced, displaying the new xenobiological classification charts. For instance, we've had to create an entirely new category. We're calling it Adaptive Apex Species, though some have suggested we simply call it the Human category and be done with it. Laughter rippled through the audience, particularly from those who had been following the ongoing classification debate. The impact on our understanding goes beyond mere categories, he continued, bringing up a series of revised medical protocols. We've had to rewrite our entire approach to survival limitations. The old charts listing absolutely lethal conditions now come with an asterisk that reads, "Except for humans, probably." Dr. Pollock's wave stepped forward, adding, "The Galactic Emergency Response Protocol has been updated too. The previous instruction of rescue immediately for extreme conditions has been amended to check if it's a human first, they might be fine." But perhaps the most profound change, Dr. Prime said, his crystals glowing with enthusiasm, has been in our research methodology. Sarah Chen's case has sparked a revolution in adaptive biology studies. We've had to face an uncomfortable truth. We've been thinking too rigidly about biological limitations. He displayed a quote from Sarah's final interview before she returned to human space. "Look, maybe the problem isn't that humans are too adaptable. Maybe everyone else just gives up too easily. Have you tried, just not dying when things get tough?" The Galactic Medical Board spent 3 weeks analyzing that statement, Dr. Prime noted, mandibles clicking in amusement. They're still not sure if it's profound wisdom or spectacular human audacity, possibly both. The hologram shifted to show the new research initiatives spawned by their findings. We've launched 37 new studies into adaptive biology. There's even a proposed expedition to other death worlds to search for more crashed humans who might have casually violated the laws of biology. Dr. Valix III, now fully converted from skeptic to enthusiast, interrupted. "Have we found any?" "4 so far," Dr. Prime confirmed, displaying their locations. One was running a bed and breakfast in a methane storm. Another had started a documentary series about local predator life forms. The third was attempting to brew beer using radioactive isotopes. And the fourth— He paused, crystals flickering with what might have been embarrassment. The fourth sent us a thank you note for the rescue attempt but declined evacuation because, and I quote, "surfing on lava flows is just getting good." The amphitheatre erupted in a mixture of laughter and horrified gasps. "In conclusion," Dr. Prime said, bringing up his final slide, "we've had to accept several new fundamental principles in xenobiology. First, human survival capabilities cannot be reliably predicted by any known scientific model. Second, what other species consider lethal environmental conditions, humans apparently consider mild inconveniences to overcome with sufficient coffee and stubbornness." He displayed the new official classification for humans in the galactic database. Species classification, human. Notes, just don't ask how they do it. Additional notes, yes, they're serious. Final notes, no, we don't understand either. And so, Dr. Prime concluded, his voice carrying a mixture of admiration and bewilderment, we find ourselves in a uniquely humbling position. We, the most advanced medical minds in the galaxy, must accept that somewhere out there, right now, a human is probably surviving something we thought impossible, figuring out how to make coffee from it, and wondering why everyone else thinks it's such a big deal. The lights in the amphitheatre gradually brightened as Dr. Prime prepared to end his presentation. Sarah Chen, by the way, has submitted a research paper titled Practical Applications of Crystal-Based Coffee Brewing in Extreme Environments. It's currently under peer review, though I must note that none of the peer reviewers are brave enough to test her recipes. And for those wondering about Surface X912, the human government has officially classified it as a moderate hazard zone and is considering it for a tourist destination. They're calling it an extreme sports paradise. The audience sat in stunned silence for a moment before breaking into thunderous applause, creating a cacophony of clicking, humming, and electromagnetic pulses. "Remember, colleagues," Dr. Prime said as his final words, "the next time you think something is biologically impossible, ask yourself, has a human tried it yet? If they haven't, just wait. They will."